This episode of Make Something Cool is brought to you by Riverside, the leading podcast and video recording platform. We are massive fans of Riverside. We literally use it to make every episode of Make Something Cool. We can't live without it anymore. And we are not the only ones. Guy Raz of How I Built This uses it. Gary Vee uses it. Companies like Spotify and the New York Times use it. It's the best. So if you are trying to record a podcast or create video content, go check out Riverside today. You can hit the link in the description and the show notes of this episode to go check it out. We couldn't recommend it enough. So go check out Riverside. This is Make Something Cool. I'm Alex Sugg, and today I am very excited to be sitting down with Kristin Neff. And Kristin is an associate professor of educational psychology at UT Austin, and she is a total expert in self-compassion. And so in addition to writing numerous academic articles and book chapters on the topic, she is the author of 2 books, Self-Compassion, The Proven Power of Being Kind to Yourself, and her new book, Fierce Self-Compassion, How Women Can Harness Kindness to Speak Up, Claim Their Power, and Thrive. Kristin, I'm so excited to have you on. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Alex. Happy to be here.
Yeah, so I'm excited to have you on, and I think it's a fun kind of time of year to have you on. I think near the end of January, you start the year off really hoping to achieve a lot of goals, and there's all these things kind of flying around where I know for me and a lot of my friends in the creative space, you kind of start the year off with, a fresh set of eyes and hopes and aspiration and dreams. And by the end of January, life starts to settle in again, and it becomes kind of hard to chase those things, and certain barriers start to get in the way. And self-compassion can start to become pretty difficult around this time of year, and just in general, I think in the creative community. And that's why I was really excited to have you on to talk about it, because self-compassion in the creative space is just a huge problem. I don't think it's anybody that I know of, it's their natural response to give it to themselves. But I think to start, what got you interested in this topic? What drove you to become an expert on self-compassion?
Well, it was really my own personal experience and my personal practice. So back my last year of graduate school, so way back in 1996, I was under a lot of stress. I was going through a difficult time. I had just gotten a divorce, stressed about would I get a job after getting my PhD. And so I started to learn mindfulness meditation. And it was in the tradition of Thich Nhat Hanh, who recently passed, a Vietnamese Zen master, who always talked a lot about the importance of turning compassion inward as well as outward, that we had to include ourselves in the circle of compassion and kindness and warmth and support. And so I tried being compassionate about all the stress I was going through. I tried to be warm and supportive and kind of understanding, ask myself, well, what do I need to get through this? Really just changing my emotional mindset from being cold to being warm. And it completely changed my ability to cope with all the stress I was going through. It made a huge difference almost immediately. And so then, I was practicing it for a few years, and then I did get a job at the University of Texas at Austin, and I decided to try to research it, because although people had certainly talked about it, no one had exactly researched self-compassion. So I defined it, created a scale to measure it, and then kind of the rest is history.
Yeah, it seems like, and I think you've been probably a huge part of this, but in the past, couple of decades, even the word that term self-compassion has become more and more popular. We're all noticing it a lot more. And I'm curious about that journey a little bit. You said it helped you a lot to go from coldness toward warmth, but was that a difficult process? That had to have been or was it like a light switch? It kind of instantly connected with you, or was it kind of a difficult transition there?
Well, so people are different. For me, it was like a light switch, right? So I was fortunate in that I wasn't a particularly harsh self-critic. I had, a warm, supportive mother, which helps. If your parents are very critical or you have a lot of trauma, it can be more challenging. So I don't want to say everyone's experience is the same, but I'd never even considered it before, right? So I was very compassionate to others, but it never even really dawned on me that I could turn that same warmth, care, and support inward. And so when I did it, the transition was fairly easy. It was more a matter of remembering than anything. For other people, it is more challenging, especially if your sense of self is really tied up with your self-critic, or you're raised by maybe really critical parents and you really firmly believe that you don't deserve kindness, then the journey will go a little more slowly. But the good news is the research shows anyone can learn self-compassion. Yeah, it may be a little more challenging for some people than others. And by the way, I should say there's a reason it's not our natural instinct. And that's because for others, when they are upset or when they fail and make a mistake, we aren't personally threatened. So we can tap into the evolved care response, which we use with our children and our group members, which is, care, warmth, support. But when we're personally threatened, which happens when we look in the mirror and we don't like what we see, or when we fail, or, we don't meet a deadline, we go into the fight, flight, or freeze mode. So we fight ourselves, we beat ourselves up, thinking somehow it's going to do one of two things. Either it's going to force us to change so we get it right. We think that somehow, illogically, we think that's going to help. Or we beat others to the punch, like we beat ourselves up before other people judge us. And we think somehow that's going to, if we're already on the floor, we can't fall any farther.
Right.
Or we flee into shame. We kind of hang our heads in shame. We isolate ourselves and kind of retreat into what we think is safety. Or we freeze and get stuck. Right. So because we're personally threatened when our suffering happens, and we aren't so threatened when other people's suffering happens, it's actually easier to use the care response for others than ourselves. So it's a little, we're kind of doing a hack. We're hacking the matrix, so to speak. We're using a system that evolved for others with ourselves.
Right.
So it's not, you might say it's not totally natural, but it's also not rocket science. We just have to remember to do it. We need to practice it. We need to start to get these neuronal pathways in place to remember the habit of using the lens of compassion for ourselves. What can we more naturally do for others?
Right. Yeah, that really strikes a chord for me. I went through, just personally, I've battled depression my whole life. And a few years ago, I was going through a pretty rough time. And I remember my therapist at the time, he kind of blew my mind, but he basically framed exactly what you're saying, but he said it in a different way. He said, you have this crazy double standard where you would never in a million years speak to another human being the way you speak to yourself. So what makes you think it's okay for you to talk to yourself the way that you do when you would never in a million years even consider doing that to someone you loved, even a stranger on the street? It's just, but what you're saying is really giving that handles, it's really interesting.
Exactly. So that's one of the easiest ways to give yourself compassion. You just imagine, well, what would I say to someone who I cared about, who was going through the exact same situation I am? And it's not just that it would be mean to say it, it would also be totally counterproductive.
Right. Yeah.
Right? If you told your child you're such a stupid idiot, it's probably not going to motivate your child to do better in school, for instance, or whatever their aim is. And yet somehow we think that's going to be effective with ourselves. It's completely counterproductive. Well, I should say it's not completely counterproductive. Here's the thing. It gets short-term compliance. Just like if you told your kid, you stupid idiot, the child might try harder temporarily because they don't want to face your anger.
Right.
It's going to have all these long-term counterproductive consequences like fear of failure, performance anxiety. Maybe they'll give up, right? They're going to lose faith in themselves. They can become so troubled when they try again that again, it's just going to make it worse.
Right.
The exact same thing happens with ourselves. And so when you think about it that way, it kind of, it's not, again, it makes intuitive sense. We just aren't used to doing it. So it's a new habit. But once you start out, what we find is a much more effective motivator, right? So again, we still want to reach our dreams. We still want to, reach our goals. We still want to be fulfilled. But we do it not because we're inadequate if we don't, because we're stupid fools if we don't. We do it just because we care about ourselves, just like with a child.
Right.
It's not like you better get good grades or I won't love you. Hopefully not. It's I want you to get good grades because I care about you and I want you to be able to, reach your dreams in life. So the source of motivation is different, and it's actually a lot more effective.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so good and so interesting. I feel like for me, sometimes, there are a lot of things like self-compassion or self-care. There are these terms now that at times it's interesting that I feel like at times now they can almost be like accidentally misused. Like there are times when it's like self-care, I'm gonna, sit and watch TV. And it's like, sometimes that very much could be self-care, but also sometimes self-care is getting out and taking a walk instead.
Absolutely.
Do you find in your work that there's ever a confusion between like what self-compassion looks like and confusing it with something else?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's why more recently I started talking about both the tender and fierce sides of self-compassion. Right?
Mm,
So compassion is, what do I need to alleviate my suffering?
right.
Sometimes we need tender acceptance, right? So we need just accept myself as I am. Maybe we need to take a break. Maybe we need to go easier. But sometimes what we need is fierceness. We need to take action, right? So yeah, I can always accept myself, but I don't want to accept all my behaviors, especially if they're harming me. And I certainly don't want to accept all the situations I find myself in if
Mm,
they're harmful, right? So sometimes we need to take action. We need to do something to alleviate our suffering. And that's what I call the fear side of self-compassion. And so what happens is anything can be misused, right? So sometimes self-compassion is actually a cover for self-indulgence. What's self-indulgence? Short-term pleasure, but long-term harm.
mm,
So if you're doing something that's actually harming you in the long run, by definition, it's not self-compassion. Because
wow.
self-compassion is all about alleviating suffering, right? It's moving toward health and well-being. The nice thing is when the bottom line is unconditional self-acceptance, even when your behaviors need to be changed, it really gives you the freedom to be authentic and look and say, wow, that's actually, I'm lying to myself. Doesn't mean I'm a bad person. Everyone does it. But can I really see what's honestly happening here?
Right.
Self-compassion gives you the safety to ask that question. And then you might say, actually, I'm not helping myself. Why don't I just, do something about it that'll
Yeah.
probably be more effective in the long run? It's really, and one way of thinking about self-compassion is it's asking yourself the question, honestly, with clear sight, what do I really need right now? And sometimes, it's maybe uncomfortable what I really need right. Often, actually, it's really uncomfortable what I need right now. But if
Yeah.
you care, you'll do it.
Right. I love that. Yeah, I feel like I was journaling like last week and I felt like I wrote this. I was like 99% of the time self-care is like a form of self-control or self-discipline. And it's more about like my thoughts when I think it's like, am I observing myself honestly and going and doing things that are self-compassionate versus like just being like having a knee-jerk response of like, I need to go do more stuff because
Yeah,
shame. But it's
right.
interesting that there's like a level of, and it sounds funny, and correct me if you disagree, but there's a level of like almost self control, maybe in being able to say, is this the right type of compassion, or is this truly self compassion in those decisions?
Right. Yeah. So maybe self-control, self-regulation, I mean, all these terms are all they're really difficult terms to connect with. But what it is the ability to turn inward,
Yes.
kind of open your heart and mind. So opening your mind means being willing to see that actually maybe what you think is good for you really isn't.
Mm,
Opening your heart is allowing that care to come forth. Really, I really do care about myself and others,
right.
and then want the best outcome. And then what comes out of that space of being open-hearted and open-minded, which
Right.
is different than what comes out of the space of fear or just negativity or judgment or shame.
Sure.
Usually what comes out of the space of open heart and open mind is much more effective, much more useful, also more creative, right?
Mm,
So the ability to see possibilities come from that space of openness. If you just really shut
right.
down and only the very narrow focus, this is wrong, this is bad, you actually can't see the creative possibilities that may be right in front of your face because you're so focused on what's wrong, you don't even see what could be right.
Right.
Makes
Yeah.
sense?
No, that's such a better way to put it. It's almost self-control is definitely not the term. Maybe like self-observing or self-witnessing a little bit more. I think
Self-aware, maybe
self-awareness.
self-aware.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
it. I was looking for the word.
yeah.
um, I mean, I think that that's an interesting, and again, I know for people listening, this is a podcast for creators, but I think that the overlap is so huge. And you had just mentioned creativity. I'm not sure. I'm sure in Austin, being at the university, you're around a ton of creative people. You're a creative person. You're an author. There are all these
Yeah.
aspects to it. Can you speak to that experience at all of the creative side to self compassion and maybe how those two things can interact in a healthy way?
Yeah, there's actually also some research showing that more
Hmm.
self-compassion enhances creativity, right?
Mm,
And so in general, what we know is that the more we feel threatened, the more we have a really negative mindset, the more narrow our focus is. Again, so it's kind of like I said, it's you only see what's wrong, you get locked into it. You don't see the potential of what could be because you're only focusing so narrowly on what's wrong.
Right.
And what the creative process is being open to potentially what could be, whether it's artistic or whether you're writing. So you kind of, again, need that open mindset in order to really be creative. And so what self-compassion does is it allows you to be not so overwhelmed by the negativity. So let's say I have the thought, so I'm actually working on a new book at the moment. So let's say I were to have the thought, I can't do this, the blank page, it's so stupid. So if I had that thought and I just allowed it just to ruminate on it, I would just be focused on that thought, right? I wouldn't be able to get out of it. It's almost like being stuck in this black tar. I'm so stupid. I can't do this. All this negativity. But if I give myself compassion for, okay, Kristin, well, first of all, it's hard. It's hard to look at that blank page and try to come up with a good idea. And yes, and also, so self-compassion has three components: mindfulness, a sense of connectedness with shared humanity, and kindness. So the mindfulness is, hey, this is really hard. I'm hurting. It's, I'm looking at the blank page. It's hard. If it's scary, all these thoughts are coming up. Well, common humanity is, I'm not the only one. I'm not the only author who stared at the blank page and felt like question whether or not they could do it. This is part of the creative process. This is, this is normal to have this experience. Nothing wrong with me in particular. Imperfection or, having fear about can you do it is part of life. And then the kindness, which is might be something like, well, why don't you just try something? If it's not that, if you don't like it, you can revise it, right? It's a process. First of all, I believe in you. I'm here to support you. You kind of talk to yourself like you would a good writing coach. Mm-hmm. Let's just put something down on the page and then you can just keep on trying again. One of the great things about self-compassion is it's linked to learning goals and a growth mindset, right? It's okay to fail,
right?
Because failure is your best teacher, right? So if you're afraid of failing because you're going to call yourself incompetent, I can't write, I'm just a failure, then you're not going to try. So it's also linked to less procrastination. Why do people procrastinate? Because they don't want to risk failing because the pain's going to be so intense if they fail and they beat themselves up.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, I'll just put something down on the page. It's okay. I can revise it. I can edit it. I can send it, get some feedback. And then that gets the process going. Right. And then when you aren't so afraid of failure, you're more willing to take risks. Well, why don't I try it this way? It may not work, but if it doesn't work, that's okay. Right. And all that freedom to try and to fail and take risks and be creative. That's what creative means, is actually enabled by having the safety net of knowing that, if I fail, that's okay. It's no big deal. Just get up off, get back on the horse and try again.
Yeah.
That's basically how it works. And again, it makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. It's it feels so obvious as you say it.
It does. I mean, that's the thing about self-compassion. It's so obvious.
Right.
But I think there's physiological reasons why we don't do it, because again, we get locked into fight, flight, or freeze. When we get freaked out.
Sure.
when we feel we're going to fail. And then also culturally, our culture doesn't teach us this. Hopefully that's starting to change. I've been working hard on it for 20 years.
Yeah.
The culture says, be compassionate to others, not yourself. That's selfish. It's going to make you lazy. Spare the rod and spoil the child. We actually used to think this for our children. Luckily now we know that it's not as effective as loving support and kindness, but we used to think that for our children, and we still think it for ourselves.
Yeah.
So we have to, it's kind of a radical act. It's a radical act of authenticity. It's saying, screw you, culture, who says that I'm not good enough, or that says that, I need the whip for myself. It's actually not true. I'm going to do what I need to do to be happy and to be creative and to be fulfilled.
Yeah, I love that. It is a very radical, and it's a very brave step too. Hey everyone, we'll be right back with the episode, but really quick, I have to tell you about Riverside, the leading podcast and video platform in the world. And truthfully, we love Riverside, and we used it way before we even talked to them about becoming a sponsor for literally every episode of Make Something Cool. We cannot do what we do without it. And the reason we love it so much is it's a lot like Zoom, but I can record much higher quality audio and video on their platform. And what's amazing is it doesn't matter where the guest is located. It sounds like we're sitting in the room together while we're recording. It's amazing. And so right after you're done recording, you download separate audio and video tracks from the Riverside platform, and you can easily edit your content from within the online platform if you want. It's so easy. It's seamless. We use it all the time. Josh, my producer, he's in Riverside editing, gathering files, and it makes all of our process so seamless and easy every single week. And we're not the only ones who love Riverside. There are over 70,000 people, ranging from individual creators to the big podcasts like Guy Raz, Gary Vee, Spotify, the New York Times. And the reason why so many people are switching to Riverside is because it's really, really good and easy and simple to use. So please go check them out today. You can hit the link in the description of the show notes, or you can just head over to riverside.fm, create an account, and get started today. Okay, back to the episode. For me, I have to keep relating this back to me because I'm just sitting here with you thinking about like my whole life, like the fear of failure is just like constant with me. And like, and I think, and that's built up from things from being a kid, things happening in my childhood, different messages that I received when I was young, and they just it became the built-in narrative of my mind, of how I was thinking, and kind of the filter I saw the world through. It's just, I have to be successful to I both get love from others, but also love myself. It's still something I struggle with every day, but it's understanding it and gaining that awareness has been so helpful to me, of just like these little traps, cultural traps. And I'm glad you touched on culture, because I think now, so much of at least my life, but most people's lives now are lived online, especially if you're a creator, an online creator, which is most of the people listening to this. You're creating things and putting them online in some way, shape, or form. And the online world is not a fair or good reflection of how to give yourself a true sense of love or self-compassion, I don't think, because we're looking at these highlight reels of everyone else's life, how awesome things are, and you're just sitting there being like, dang, I suck compared to all these people. I couldn't do what they are doing, or all these things. Like, do you find that the internet and that, like, this culture we live in is intensifying some of these problems?
Yeah. So there's not a lot of research yet. We're kind of behind, I would say, in the field of psychology we know a little bit, but yes, absolutely. So take body images. One of the examples that's been studied the most, right? So people who look at a lot more Instagram photos, which are filtered. I'm sorry, I have a friend who's 55, and if you look at her picture, she looks like she's 30, right? So, like, why are you doing that? But anyway, but she feels like she needs to, right? So if they aren't even real, the images we see. And so that raises the standards of what we think we're supposed to look like. And then here's a thought, Alex, going back to control. This is the way the culture controls us, isn't it? This is the way the culture tries to get us to buy their products, for instance,
right?
Or to do what they want us to do, right? Maybe your family, I don't know your family at all, so I'm just saying in general, hypothetically, but maybe they want you to be a lawyer or a doctor or something that reflects well on them. Maybe they didn't want you to become a creative. And so criticism, if you don't meet their standards, is a way of controlling you. And that's why self-compassion is really a rebellious act. It's kind of saying, I don't give a bleep if you like me or not, or you like my choices. I'm going to ask what's going to make, what's really true to my soul? What fulfills me?
Right.
And whether or not you like it, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to make my decisions based on whether or not you like me, because you know what? I care about myself, right? So the source of approval and worthiness stops being so focused on the outside and achievement, and really starts becoming more internally focused.
Yeah.
And maybe you will make different choices. Maybe you won't, but the choices you do make will be more authentic.
Right.
And then your motivation will come from this internal source as opposed to this external, pressure from society.
100%. I think, like, for me, it's, I love that you're saying that. And even just as a creator, thinking about the choices I make now, whether that's what I'm like making this show versus something else, or doing, like, I'm choosing things now, even if they're like have less financial potential or less success possibilities, like whatever the things before that really drove me,
Yeah.
I've had to really work to take a step back and say, it doesn't really matter what external success things get you if you're still miserable. And like
Exactly.
if you're just trapped in a prison of what everyone else thinks of you all the time, that's no way to live your life. And so, but it's so much easier said than done, I think, in real life practice, especially when you're like, for me, it's this hard balance of, I want to create and use the internet to get a message out, to help people, to connect with people, to do like all the positive sides of it. But when it's the water you swim in, it tends to creep up on you. And it's a really hard battle, I think, for online creators right now to find a healthy balance between the two.
It is. And that's why, so going back to the three components of self-compassion, and you really need all three for this to be a healthy, stable mindset. The first is mindfulness. You got to be aware constantly. You got to check in, is this true for me? Is this what I want to be doing? What messages are being sent? Maybe they're very subtle. Do I buy into those messages? The sense of connectedness is really important because, and also culture kind of wants us to think, we're going to reject you. You're going to be all alone unless you're what we want you to be, unless you're successful, you look a certain way. Here's the thing about self-compassion. Your sense of connectedness doesn't come from like literally other people approving of you. Your sense of connectedness is seeing your interdependence with all of humanity. You can go larger, all of life. If you're a spiritual person, you can go all the way out to non-duality, right?
Right.
So instead of allowing ourselves to feel isolated and alone, which is very scary for us as human beings, if we don't achieve or if people don't like us, our sense of connectedness also comes internally. We're just knowing that we're an intrinsic part of life, worthy whether or not we achieve, right? And so that sense of connectedness, again, just being aware of it, how that fear of being alone and isolated makes us control so many of our decisions. The more we're able to just understand, hey, we're part of life. You can't take that away from me. I'm not alone. Helps us feel more safe. And then finally, again, just the kindness. And it does take some practice. You may need to put sticky notes up around your house. You may need to read books. You do have to work on it because your neurons are used to going down the pathway of self-criticism, isolation, and kind of obliviousness, right?
Right.
So you have to work on it. It is a practice, but it's actually not that hard. All you got to do is say, what would I say to a good friend I cared about in the same situation?
Yeah.
You don't have to read a book to know the answer to that. You know it. You just have to remember to do it.
Right. Yeah, I got kind of, as you were talking, I had a little bit of a devastating moment thinking about how many wrong or unhealthy choices have been made just out of pure fear of, and not in a place of self-compassion, of just doing things because you feel like it's what you should be doing versus what's actually self-loving, which is it's an intense thing, but it's also super encouraging to hear that there are ways around it too.
And also, don't beat yourself up for beating yourself up. Remember, because we can start doing that, use the old patterns.
Yeah.
We need to remember that we're just trying to be safe. We're just trying to be safe. We're just trying to be loved. That's so human, isn't it? Of course, we want to be loved by others. What could be more natural, right?
Right.
But when we can remember that actually it's not helpful. It's not achieving the goal we want it to, which is to be safe and loved.
Yeah.
The more effective way to achieve the goal to be safe and loved is to really give that to ourselves as much as possible.
Yeah.
Again, maybe you are that lawyer who just makes a lot of money. Maybe your parents think you're great and everyone gives you all this praise, but you could be miserable inside. We know many people who experience that.
Right.
Right. So what's the true source of happiness?
Right.
Is it external success or is it doing what you want to be doing? And you still have to pay your bills and all those things. Of course you do this. But, again, what really makes me happy? That's the question of self-compassion. What do I really need? And you got to have guts to ask yourself that question and then to follow the answer.
Right.
That's why you need the fierce self-compassion. I call it mama bear self-compassion. It's like bravery. Sometimes we need to get angry as well. People think anger and compassion, do they go together? Absolutely. When anger's aimed at reducing harm, like, look at the Black Lives Matter movement or the Me Too movement. There's a lot of anger in that. Again, hopefully the anger can be not so directed at people. We don't want to make anyone the enemy, but at injustice, of course we should be angry at injustice. We need, and that anger can help motivate us to stand up to it and say, you're not going to harm me anymore.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah. Can you feel anger toward yourself for not giving yourself self-compassion, or is that just the same deadly cycle?
Again, so anger is useful if it's aimed at behaviors that are causing harm. It's not useful when it's aimed at people, ourselves or others who are causing harm.
Right.
In the sense that whenever you dehumanize anyone, yourself or others, you're actually just causing more problems. You're actually causing harm. And it's tricky. So we kind of blurred. It's not easy. And by the way, I'm not an anger expert. I actually get it wrong all the time. I'm good at forgiving myself, and I get angry and saying apologizing to others. So I'm not going to pretend that it's easy, but just to know that it does have a place. Compassion isn't always soft and squishy. Sometimes compassion is mama bear. Sometimes we do need to protect ourselves. So to the extent, both with ourselves and others, that we can focus on stopping harmful behaviors as opposed to dehumanizing anyone. I mean, Martin Luther King talked about this, right? I mean, I'm obviously not the first person to talk about this. This is the whole point of like compassionate social change.
Right.
I'm saying no, but you're still a human being, even if I disagree with your actions, and I'm going to do everything I can to stop them.
Right. That's such a good distinction, the behaviors versus the person. I think maybe to wrap up, this has been such a good conversation. You've mentioned mindfulness a few times.
Yes.
And I'm curious the place maybe that you had mentioned non-duality. That's a word. I'm actually currently reading a lot about this, and we don't have to talk specifically about non-duality. It's kind of a very heady.
I would love to. I know it's heady, but brain will explode. But so this is ironic. Self-compassion, if you take it far enough, gets you there.
Yeah. Well, maybe now that we've opened the box, what is non-duality?
Okay. Well, and of course, I can't say it.
Or the best way to, yeah.
Well, so if you think of non-duality is, I'm going to put it this way, which is understanding the illusion of a separate self, right? That we think we're these separate egos disconnected from the rest of the world. When in fact, if you start really looking, who we are is interwoven. There's a Thich Nhat Hanh called it interbeing. Who we are is kind of inseparable from the rest of the world. There's all these causes and conditions that create thoughts, feelings, etc., events. But in terms of our being, the I who is being, it's intimately connected with the rest of the world. And so let's leave it at that. So kind of the ultimate reality is oneness, and the sense of separation is an illusion.
Yeah.
A lot of when I first started, so I come at this idea of self-compassion from Buddhist practice, which leads eventually to non-duality. And a lot of the Buddhists said like they didn't like it at first. There was some resistance because isn't self the problem?
Right.
But actually what happens is what's the problem is if you turn the lens of love and compassion outward and not inward. When you judge yourself and you shame yourself, you are really reifying that sense of separation. You're blaming yourself. You're pretending that you have this control, which you have a lot less of than we think we do. So the more we open our hearts to ourself, right? So another way of putting it, you can just call it inner compassion. The more we turn the lens of compassion inward, actually what happens is the sense of separate self starts to be dismantled.
Yep.
Right? We're aware that, actually, these thoughts and behaviors or feelings are connected to other causes and conditions. They aren't really so separate. There is no one in control here. Right. And then the love, when the love goes inward as well as outward, there's not this separation between inward and outward.
Right.
Which is what we do most of the time. We give compassion outward, but not inward.
Right.
When it's 360, then that sense of separation starts to melt.
Definitely.
And so again, if you're into non-duality, just call it inner compassion, and you'll probably get less hung up on the word self, because I had to call it self-compassion. Inner compassion would have sounded weird.
Right.
But actually, I call it common humanity in most of my writings. But what I'm really talking about is interbeing or interdependence.
Yeah. So that's so good. I think that point is huge. Like even for me in my, I have a meditation practice. I've been trying to stay consistent for years and years, and it's helped me a lot. And one of the most like true experiences I've had with it on this point is when I'm most open and loving toward myself and others. That's when
Yes.
I feel, that's when I'm furthest away from depression or furthest away from feeling self-obsession and just like
Yes.
this obsession with self. And that actually makes me miserable. And I'm most disconnected when I'm very self-absorbed in negativity and all those things. And so I think the whole point of it, what you're saying, is really, really good and important. I'm curious, just like meditation as a practice, has that been a big part of your journey? It seems like it probably has been.
Yeah. So I learned about it when learning meditation. I've done a lot of retreats. I haven't done them recently because of COVID. Actually, I'm signed up for my first retreat to go to again in end of March. So I'm really excited because that's been a difficulty. But yeah, so meditation. So it's not necessary to learn self-compassion, right? So we know that it doesn't really matter whether you learn self-compassion through meditations or through just, putting your hand on your heart and saying, wow, this is really hard. How can I care for myself in the moment? But it is really useful because meditation allows you to get still. It allows you, it's kind of like, all that stuff swirling around in the glass. When the silt settles, you can see more clearly what's going on. So it's very, very useful. It's not necessary, but it helps.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely.
No, that's so good. Yeah.
It lets you see online with the thoughts that are arising, the emotions that are stemming from those thoughts, and also often the illusion of those thoughts and emotions.
Right.
The thought that I'm bad, that's an illusion.
Totally. But if left unobserved or
Yes.
unexamined, you're just going to go through your day feeling like I'm bad.
Exactly.
But if you take the moment to just observe that thought, and you're just like, wait, why am I bad? I'm actually not. This isn't actually
do more than just observe. Here's the thing about mindfulness. Mindfulness is observe it really good, but then you say, oh, that hurts to have that thought. So you open your mind and your heart. You need both, the mind and the heart. One without the other is incomplete.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so good. That's so good. I think that's a great way to wrap this up, Kristin. You have a couple books. Where do you want people to find you and get more connected to your work and what you're up to?
Well, it's really easy. Just Google self-compassion. I got in early, so all algorithms lead to me.
Yes. Yeah. I was very impressed. I was very impressed by your domain. Was it selfcompassion.org?
Yeah. Well, yes. I mean, again, the word wasn't really in common parlance when I first started. So it's been 20 years now, though, right? So, but you can take a self-compassion test, the scale I developed. You can, if you're a research nerd, there's hundreds of research studies on my site. There's lots of free guided practices, meditations, or short, small practices you can do. I've got a TED Talk on there. So it's really the best place to start. And if you're really interested, there's a link to the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, which is a nonprofit I co-founded, where you can take online self-compassion training. So the technology has been developed to learn how to be more self-compassionate, and we know it works.
Yeah.
Also lots of empirical support for the fact that it works. So all you got to do is really decide to change the way you relate to yourself, and the way to get there is already in place. You just got to take the first step.
Yeah, that's so good. I have one last question. Do you have an app?
I personally don't have an app. There is a good self-compassion app out there that actually just got released.
Okay. I was going to say, you should definitely record an app and build an app. That'd be so cool.
I know the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion has been working on it for years. I put some time into it and it never really happened. So I've been focusing on other stuff, but there actually is one good self-compassion app out there already. There'll probably be a lot more in the future.
Cool.
So yeah.
Awesome. Amazing. You have so many great resources and so much good, helpful information for all of us. So thank you so much, Kristin, for being on. I feel, I even walked into the interview feeling a little frazzled, busy, crazy. And even just this conversation helped me feel more self-compassionate toward myself. So thank you so much for joining. And I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Alex. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. And thanks to everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and want to get more of these conversations sent directly to your inbox, head over to alexsugg.com and sign up for my newsletter. And as always, please go leave a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts for the show. And last but not least, this episode was edited and produced by the one and only Josh Perez. And if you are looking to get help with your podcast, Josh is your guy. He's a great producer and an even better human being. So please get in touch with him at justjoshperez.com. I'll be back soon with another new episode. So until then, let's go make something cool and be self-compassionate in the process. Bye. This episode of Make Something Cool was brought to you by Riverside, the leading podcast and video recording platform. To learn more, check out the link in the show notes or the description of this video or podcast.